Lieutenant Timothy Dorsey sprinted across the flight deck of USS Saratoga, ducking between deck crews as jet blast roared across the Mediterranean sky. He vaulted into the cockpit of his F-14 Tomcat, strapped in, and gripped the stick. This was his chance to prove himself and exercise display Determination 87, NATO's massive wargame off the Italian coast. But just before launch, new encrypted coordinates came through, with virtually no explanation. As his Tomcat rocketed off the deck, Dorsey recalled a rumor circling the ready room days earlier. Rogue actors in the region hijacking American planes for kamikaze attacks. It sounded absurd. Now, alone in the sky, hunting an unidentified contact, that rumor didn't seem so far-fetched, and as he spotted an intruder ahead, he couldn't help but feel as if this wasn't a drill anymore. Something is off. It was September 22nd, 1987. The rules of Display Determination 87 were straightforward. U.S. Air Force pilots would pose as enemy aggressors, attempting to locate and simulate an attack on USS Saratoga. Meanwhile, Navy aviators like Lieutenant Timothy Dorsey would do everything in their power to intercept, defend, and deny the incoming threat before it reached the carrier's hull number, which, upon visually identifying, would count as a victory. For Dorsey, still under a year into his deployment, this would be one of his first major combat exercises. He'd been assigned to fly wingman alongside a senior pilot and the squadron skipper. In his back seat was Lieutenant Commander Edmund Dutch Holland, a seasoned radar intercept officer tasked with operating the Tomcat's tracking systems and guiding weapons engagement. But just as Dorsey started his engine and the flight deck buzzed with final preparations, he was informed that the second Tomcat would not launch next to him. His mission had been altered, and he was now to fly solo. The orders came quickly and cryptically. Switch to an encrypted frequency, head north, and intercept an unidentified intruder. Dorsey and Dutch were guided by the Saratoga's radar crew toward an Illinois Air National Guard KC-135 tanker, mid-air, extending its refueling boom to a lone USAF RF-4C Phantom. As Dorsey's Tomcat approached the Phantom, it immediately disengaged from the tanker and began a sharp descent, turning back toward the direction Dorsey had come from, straight toward the Saratoga. Dorsey's Tomcat slipped into trail position, shadowing the Phantom just a few thousand feet behind. For the next 15 minutes, the Navy pilot tried repeatedly to get a lock with his radar targeting system, but the Phantom would not make it easy. The Phantom's movements were evasive but deliberate, and now, with its nose pointed toward the carrier group, it began flying what looked like an attack profile. Dorsey, still uncertain if he was going after a real enemy or not, got his AIM-9 Sidewinders ready for deployment. He radioed Saratoga, asking for weapon status. The reply came through his headset, quote, "Red and free." It was the standing phrase that meant permission to engage with live fire. Dorsey froze, his fingers tightening on the stick. He turned to Dutch, quote, "Jesus, do they want me to shoot this guy?" Behind him, Dutch responded with a casual quote, "Yeah, shoot." Dorsey squeezed the trigger. The Sidewinder shot off the rail with a whoosh, streaking toward the target at close range, less than a mile away. The missile dove slightly, adjusted its track, and hit with precision. Dorsey later recalled the moment, quote, "I saw the Sidewinder dip low and to the inside of the turn. I saw it hit, probably around the stabilator on the port side, and then a big fireball. Direct hit." The Sidewinder obliterated the Phantom's tail section. The RF-4C lurched violently, pitched forward, and began to spiral out of control, its torn fuselage trailing smoke as it plummeted toward the Mediterranean. Inside the cockpit, Captain Michael Ross and First Lieutenant Michael Sprouse had no idea what had hit them. They were not hostile actors aboard a hijacked aircraft, just two seasoned American aviators carrying out their assigned role in a military exercise. With the aircraft in a 2.5 negative G dive, Ross and Sprouse ejected from the Phantom at over 600 miles per hour, their bodies slammed by brutal force as they were ripped from the cockpit and hurled into the sky, Behind them, aboard the F-14, the radar intercept officer couldn't believe what had just happened. When Dutch had given Dorsey the go-ahead to fire, he believed the pilot understood this was meant to be a simulated shot. The RIO never noticed that Dorsey actually had his missiles live and ready to go. He lunged for the radio, calling out for backup to come save the downed men at once. Back aboard the Saratoga, the crew launched an SH-3 Sea King rescue helicopter to lift the downed aviators, who had landed roughly 5 miles from the carrier. The Sea King hoisted them from the water, and they were rushed back aboard the carrier, where medics immediately began to treat them. Their faces were swollen, and their bodies covered in bruises, but they were in one piece. According to Ward Carroll, a former F-14 RIO and military commentator, the men were ushered below deck, cleaned up, and offered the rare luxury of ice cream. Then, Captain David Frost of the Saratoga came to speak with them, revealing it had been one of their own who had shot them down. The pilots couldn't believe it at first, and as Carroll stated, all they could say was, quote, "I thought we were on the same side," to which the captain responded, quote, "Normally we are. Apparently today we weren't." Meanwhile, out on the flight deck, maintenance crews inspecting Dorsey's Tomcat noticed something strange. The sidewinder was missing, and the launch rail showed a charred scorch mark, clear evidence that the missile had been fired. The Navy had found its culprit. Misguided. Just 4 years after the shootdown during Display Determination 87, a similar incident would take place as coalition aircraft soared across the Iraqi sky during Operation Desert Storm. American forces were set on establishing control and dismantling Iraqi reconnaissance networks. Among the units tasked with these missions was a formation of AH-64 Apache helicopters from the 1-1 Aviation Battalion, assigned to hunt down hostile scouts hiding in the deep desert. On the night of February 16, 1991, weather conditions rapidly deteriorated. The desert sky thickened with low clouds, dust, and smoke, blinding pilots and reducing visibility. Yet intelligence reports insisted that an enemy reconnaissance battalion was positioned just beyond the secured zone. Task Force 1-1 was given the green light to engage. In the early hours of February 17th, a flight of Apaches took off, their infrared systems sweeping the desert in search of targets. Less than an hour into the mission, their sensors picked up a group of silhouettes on the sand, barely visible through the haze, but consistent with the enemy vehicle profiles they'd been briefed on. Colonel David Weissman, the task force commander, insisted the targets were hostile, but not everyone was convinced. The voice of Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Hales, battalion commander and lead pilot, was recorded in the cockpit audio, quote, "Boy, I'm going to tell you, it's hard to pull this trigger. Back me up a little bit here." Despite no definite confirmation, he was given the go-ahead to proceed. Hales launched 2 Hellfire missiles toward the figures ahead. As they dashed toward the target, he muttered, quote, "I hope it's an enemy." Seconds later, the vehicles were obliterated. Through the smoke, 2 figures were spotted fleeing the wreckage, running for cover. The Apaches were instructed to finish them off with cannon fire. But just then, the pack received an update, quote, "Iron Deuce, Stalwart reporting that maybe a friendly vehicle may have been hit." That day, 2 American scouts lost their lives, and the task force responsible for it was immediately ordered to displace. Promotion. The friendly fire tragedies over the Mediterranean and Iraq forced the U.S. military to tighten its operational protocols to prevent such mistakes from happening again. Yet, as new safety measures were implemented, there was still sharp criticism about the way military forces handled those responsible for the incidents. While Lieutenant Timothy Dorsey was permanently grounded from flying Navy aircraft upon being found guilty of shooting down the U.S. Air Force RF-4C Phantom during Display Determination 87, he was not stripped of his pilot wings. Instead, he transitioned into administrative positions, serving as Personnel and Manpower Management Officer with Fighter Wing 1, and later as Assistant Force Personnel Officer for Commander, Naval Air Force, U.S. Atlantic Fleet. Some speculated that Dorsey's continued advancement went beyond professional resilience. His father, James Dorsey, was a highly respected naval aviator who had commanded the aircraft carrier USS America at the time of the accident. Ironically, he too had faced accusations of accidentally downing a fellow pilot during the Vietnam War, yet still rose through the ranks. Timothy Dorsey would later pivot into the Naval Reserve Intelligence Program, where he excelled. In 2012, the Navy even nominated him for promotion to Rear Admiral. But that nomination didn't go unchallenged. Michael Ross, the Air Force pilot who had nearly perished in the incident 25 years earlier, was stunned to learn that the man who had shot him down might become a flag officer and spoke out against him. The missile blast had left Ross with chronic leg, shoulder, and spinal injuries, requiring over 30 surgeries. In his own words, quote, "Dorsey ruined my life, basically made me 100% disabled by Air Force standards." When he was asked about the nomination, Ross declared, quote, "I almost got sick." Amid the controversy, Dorsey penned a letter of apology to Ross, claiming he hadn't known about the lasting extent of his injuries. But for Ross and many others, the letter came decades too late. Despite Dorsey's achievements in the intelligence community, the backlash against his promotion grew. Pressure mounted in Congress, and the Senate ultimately declined to confirm his nomination. Timothy Dorsey would finish his Navy career without ever making Rear Admiral.